So it is a total joy to be here. And what, you got it? Oh, you want to take the little pieces of paper away. So I want you to remember President Obama today. This was like Obama, the happy warrior. You know, he's got, maybe he bet on the Ohio State game. I mean, I don't know what it is, but he's talking about basketball. He's in the Midwest. He's loose. He's lanky. He's on his game. This really was an FDR moment for the president. And remember, when FDR comes to office in 1935, 90% of farmers don't have electricity, even though rich kids in cities are playing with electric toys. Right? Terrible problem. And there are a few companies, just a handful, that control electricity in the United States. Private trusts, enormous conglomerates, subject to neither oversight nor competition. And you know that great picture of Roosevelt with his sort of chin up in the air on the cigarette holder there? That's his happy warrior moment, because he decided to take on special interests. I'm going to do it. I'm the president. This is wrong. We've got to fix this situation. That we're going to drive the country forward. And that was the moment for Mr. Obama today, because he makes this announcement, the most American announcement in the most American place, right? And this announcement is about opportunity, it's about choice, it's about freedom. It's a key moment for the president, it's a key moment for his legacy, and it's also a key moment for our understanding of ourselves as a country. And it really is not about technology. That's what's so beautiful about this moment. So 6 years ago, today, I was working on the White House staff as a special assistant to the president for science, technology, and innovation. I could not afford a place in DC, and so I was a perpetual house guest. Just try that for some time and then see how your friends feel about you later when you show up. I threw everything overboard, everything. Family, friends, health, out the window. Each day seemed to have no end. I never thought when I left the house in the beginning of the day that I would ever come back again. And I've been told that part of living a good life is to answer the call to adventure. Well, this was my adventure. The country was sliding into an economic abyss. He's right to remind us of that. I remember attending the first cabinet meeting, and the faces around that table were gray, and they were strained, and they were tense. I don't think many Americans had a real idea about just how bad things were that day. There was real anxiety written there. What were we going to do to move forward? The Congress passes the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, and there's a little part in there, a few $1 billion, divided between two agencies who had been actively lobbying against each other on the Hill with respect to this program. For stimulus money for control over broadband subsidies. One of them had never run a grants program, really, and the other one wasn't historically famous for managing its loan program very well. I think it's fair to say. 6 years have passed, everything's different now, but it was, at that time, that was a problem. The money in that bill, $7 billion, was not going to have a national impact. It wasn't going to change the story. We would not see an upgrade across the country. But still, when the Obama administration showed up 6 years ago, those cold January days, the cable and telco industry held their breath just a little bit, like, ugh, what's going to happen? Is the status quo going to be altered? I remember that time as one of great pride, real pride. From nothing, these agencies got to work. There wasn't a leader in place at the NTIA at this point. Staff just plunged in. And I think especially the Broadband Technology Opportunities Program implemented by the Department of Commerce will be understood someday as one of the great points of light of the Obama administration. Really is a great program. It was staffed by people with great heart, great conviction, great energy, and it got communities across the country thinking about fiber, thinking about how to drag their assets together to be ready to build fiber. And it is great today to see those Department of Commerce people turned into an advice bank for communities that want to ask questions about how to build fiber where they are. They have a lot of expertise, and now they're being turned in this direction. So great pride, but I also remember this time, personally for me, as one of really great misery. The general wisdom inside the administration seemed to be that there was plenty of cable out there, and for whatever reason, a third or so of Americans just weren't buying high-speed internet access. But that must be because they're not interested, right? That's got to be the point. You can't force them to buy this stuff, people said. And maybe that stimulus money should be used to spread crappy wireless across the country, sort of like a coating of peanut butter. That would be the best way to spend the money. The market for internet access, after all, was just fine. And really, within a few months, AT&T and Verizon and Comcast and everybody just exhaled with relief. Everything was fine. No one talked about prices, really. International comparisons were not relevant. They were waved away with a wave of the hand. Oversight by the FCC was not needed. The market was doing fine. There were some dumb regulations at the Department of Transportation and EPA, but, so what? Leave them in place. And by the way, that's a big part of the president's plan today, too. I want you to notice that he's going to force those agencies to sit in a room for 6 months and look at all the rules that get in the way. Why does the Department of Transportation make it difficult to have a really good dig once policy next to a freeway? Why is that true? What can the EPA do to loosen things up so that fiber can be installed more easily? And they have to report back in 6 months. This is very hard to do. Interagency work is bone-crushing. So he's demanding this, and that's big news. So no oversight by the FCC, don't need that. Who cared about internet access anyway? It was a luxury. Key people, senior people in the administration just did not get it. So here's one story in the late afternoon for you to think about over cocktails. I remember telling someone, senior guy, they're all guys, so I'm not giving anything away, that we could move money that had been subsidizing phone service, right, for very poor people in America, over to high-speed internet access. Move it from phone to high-speed internet access because high-speed internet access was going to be the basic medium for the future. And that man looked at me and he said, "But phone is two-way." Okay. All right, I'm glad to get that off my chest. I did my best. But politically I was outflanked by forces I didn't even understand. I'd never served in government before. I was tremendously idealistic. And after I left, I felt disillusioned with the whole setup. The people I had thought would be transformative and would understand the centrality of high-speed internet access and the centrality of that to the country's future had ended up being mere mortals, feet of clay, not quite understanding how important this was. The idea of net neutrality, which had been in the president's platform in 2007, was tagged as radical, right? Radical. And so I got to work writing Captive Audience, which immediately attracted hundreds of AstroTurf reviews on Amazon. Really, hundreds. Go take a look someday. It earned me my own special following on Twitter. Hello, Richard Bennett. Hello, Brett Glass. Maybe you guys don't know these people, but they're on me. They're following every move. I'm telling you all this now because everything has changed. We are in a different world now, 6 years later. I'll admit, I wish it had been like this 6 years before, but I'm so glad. I'm so moved that it has changed now. Because we're 2 for 2. Title II and community fiber, just in the last few months. Although the president may have lost, or his party lost, the midterm elections, he has found his voice. Knowledge, light seems to be flooding in. We now understand that demand for high-speed internet access, and particularly high-capacity internet access, is outpacing supply. We get that high prices for this utility are the key barrier to adoption. That's in the reports released today. And that leaving out a quarter or a third of Americans threatens our ability to survive on the global stage, not just compete, but survive on the global stage. And by the way, we're now talking about the global stage without embarrassment, totally new. This is great. pointing to those other countries. The president released a video where he's got his iPad and he's saying, look, Hong Kong, Cedar Rapids. It's amazing. We have a story today about why oversight, regulation, and Title II are needed. And here's the story. It unleashes the regulatory ideal. The idea is that the regulatory ideal creates opportunity for everyone, for everybody in the country. Right? We don't just have 5 companies that do well, but everybody does well. So most importantly, we have a story about us, about Americans, and why getting this high-speed internet access issue right, fiber to everyone, represents one of the key social justice issues of our time, and the greatest opportunity for America in a century. And you can see people focusing on it. I mean, clearly we are, but the National League of Cities, U.S. Conference of Mayors, tremendous energy being devoted to this. We're here because all across America, mayors are calling for the installation of high-speed internet access, not just for municipal buildings, but for business buildings. America's circuits haven't been upgraded, really, in the last 15 years since the introduction of the cable modem. And citizens and businesses are clamoring for ubiquitous, unlimited, cheap fiber access. It's becoming as important a social issue as electrification was back in the 30s. And by the way, electrification was the key presidential policy domestic issue in the races of the 30s. I know that seems weird, but it was. And I believe that high-speed internet access is going to be up there in 2016, so get ready, you've all got speeches to make. So you all know this to be true. Fiber connectivity to the internet is the global standard, gig cities. There could not be a better time to be investing in fiber in America. Interest rates are at an all-time low. Lots of people would welcome the jobs that would be created. The spillovers of all of this, the economic activity is great. And we're heading towards, we're there, a digital society. We do have to figure out how to measure it, and I hope to help along those lines, but we know that this is where we're headed. Here's another personal story about me. Last year, I went to Seoul and to Stockholm to see what life is like in places that really live with fiber. I asked young people about their lives, about their true friends, about their families. In Seoul, I found rigid hierarchy. I don't know how many of you have been there, but it's really something. So all the girls get plastic surgery. There are hundreds of plastic surgery places because they all want to look different, but they end up looking exactly the same, and they talk about this freely. The pressure to get the right civil service job is overwhelming. The sort of squeeze on a Seoul teenager is really something. And the giant conglomerates will smash any startup. So people don't even talk about starting new things because of these gonzo companies that will just step on them. So they may have connectivity, but they're not as entrepreneurial as we are. They don't have what the president described as pluck. You have to pause before you say pluck, but then when you say it, it has a great impact. They don't have pluck, and they don't have ingenuity, and they don't have that ability to take risks that we do. And that ferry disaster in April, that was a really big deal for Seoul teenagers. That reminded the younger generation, as if they needed any reminding, that older people are rigid idiots and can't be trusted. And that ferry disaster is going to haunt South Korea for generations. In Stockholm, they're desperate for grit. They're yearning for grit because everything's so smoothly organized that kids are a little complacent. They all know they're going to get jobs. I had a wonderful virtual reality tour from a teenager there who's very sure he'll get a job. But things run too smoothly. There's this kind of bovine calm in Stockholm. So they've opened up a nonstop flight to Silicon Valley, and they're hoping that some grit will arrive on the next plane. But that kind of scratchiness, density, interest of American life, street life, they don't have that there. They're trying to synthetically create it. So you know where I'm heading with this. My trip led me then to Kansas City. I came here last year, and I met many people who are now here today during that trip, also asking about their friendships and their relationships and their lives with fiber. Kansas City's competitive advantage is not the same as San Francisco or New York City, and it really shouldn't be. This isn't going to be the place of startup bright, shiny objects. Kansas City is all about, from my perspective, community and family and roots and belonging. I interviewed kids from Kansas City who were homesick when they were an hour away. They missed it so much. I interviewed that wonderful young man in Startup Village who took out an IRA, drained an IRA in order to build a home for hackers so they could share the Google Fiber connection, just because he felt it was the right thing to do. Right? Wonderful young man. And he told me this terrible story that one of his low moments was, this bungalow was pretty decrepit. He was crawling underneath the porch, dragging out corpses of cats that had decayed underneath that house. You're all awake now, right? He did this so that he could share that fiber connection with people who really needed it. He thought it was important. Kansas City, I firmly hope, will be the place that truly tells the story of us, right? That gives us that feeling of why we're doing that. That figures out definitively how to get fiber to everybody, every public housing unit, every impoverished household, that tells its local bank that there's reliable money to be made from investing in fiber over a long period of time, and that the city can't afford to leave anyone behind. Everybody in this country needs fiber, because that's the real story behind President Obama's remarks today. It's a story of creating a genuine middle class that has optimism and freedom and choices. It's about being proud and positioned to thrive. He said all these things. We're ready to thrive. Mayor James said this very well yesterday. Leadership lacks the ego of politicians. It was a beautiful phrase. Leadership lacks the ego of politicians. President Obama here is leading. He's saying that it may take years. He's lost his last election in the midterms. He's staking a claim on the future. He's right. The future belongs to those who give the next generation a reason to hope. That's what he's doing. You can hear it in his voice. That joke, we're going to need a bigger boat. Whew, that was great. Yeah, that's hope. That's optimism. We're capable of great things using this fiber access, and we'll think of more ingenious things than Seoul and Stockholm ever will. We've got that pluck and grit and a certain amount of contempt for hierarchy. He said, I'm on the side of students. I'm on the side of people who want to do disruptive things. I'm on the side of wanting everybody to have America. It's the most American speech he's made. And it really is the right time to take this on. You all know this. The FCC said the right threshold should be 25 megabits per second. But 90% of those subscriptions in the US go to the local cable monopoly that can charge whatever they want. DSL just can't compete. Where local cable monopolies face competition only from copper, they get 99% of the available subscriptions. It's great. They're harvesting. This landscape is radically transformed by your presence, by fiber. Where fiber to the home exists, cable gets just 56% of subscriptions. They really battle it out. But there's very little fiber so far in the US. We only have about 10% of Americans on fiber. And the overall internet connectivity picture is grim. I'm glad we touched on that. 40% of houses in Detroit, no internet access at all. Numbers for Kansas City, Kansas, pretty alarming. Astonishing percentages in Cleveland, Miami, my home city of New York City, my other home city of Boston. Everybody's struggling. They're all on the list of underserved communities. By proposing to block the state laws that get in the way of these community networks, by proposing to get rid of those idiotic EPA and DOT regulations that get in the way, and push out great information from our friends at NTIA, the president is appealing to our sense of collective identity, the story of us. Because fiber optic is a technology that is at once old and new. It's really both. What's new about fiber optic is unlimited capacity. Our brains can't even take that in. It's terribly exciting, both in the form of information received and sent. But what's old about universal fiber access is that it's just like clean water, electricity, street grid, decent basic education. It's a basic foundation for everything we do, allowing everyone to thrive and increase their choices and possibilities in life. Communicate when needed, as needed. Be present when needed, as needed. Share when needed, as needed, without worrying about the availability or cost of a communications line. Imagine what would be possible. We've spent a lot of time imagining here. In an American city fully served by fiber optic internet access with pluck and ingenuity. Simple things like navigation get easy because your cell phone never crumps out. Hard things like, I'm going to use this example, playing a string quartet in many different cities at the same time, become easy. Self-driving cars, safer and shareable, could become the norm. As a New Yorker, I'm a pretty poor driver, so I'm looking forward to that. Assisted living centers outfitted with sensors could focus the work of home health aides on the crucial one-to-one interactions that are needed rather than sort of mechanically checking in on people every few minutes. And here's the killer app that requires fiber everywhere. Everybody, I have the answer. The killer app is presence, because that's what humans want more than anything. To be in the doctor's office to meet. The pixels fall away with these high-resolution connections. To be in the classroom, not just passively watching somebody else talk. To be on one side of a window of glass that permits you a view of anything in the world. Humans don't care about throughput, they don't care about speed. They just feel, using fiber connections, that they can see others and be seen by others in turn. And it's not even just presence. We're heading into something new. Attentional proximity, a little bit of a buzzword, but really knowing that someone's focusing on you, we'll be able to do that with fiber. And that's why President Obama's announcement was so human. This is the most human technology we've ever seen. Full bandwidth communication is love, in a sense. You're being fully understood by the person you're with. Kansas City has sparked our imagination. It's our World's Fair. We didn't dream about electricity until the World's Fair took place. And we could see all the domestic uses in the house for electricity. My grandmother called the electricity bill the light bill. What else would it be used for? Kansas City is making us dream. And now hundreds of other American cities are going to follow. And this thriving private market and ingenuity won't come from Seoul or Stockholm. It'll come from us in a thoroughly bipartisan way. Each talk can only have one message. Here's the main message I have here. On the global stage, we face China. China has few friends. They're not very good at collaborating, but they're very powerful. And in the short term, China may be able to build 200 to 300 million fiber-to-the-home connections for their citizens. They claim they've done it already. We're not sure about the numbers. We keep sort of probing. It's hard to tell. Maybe we're jealous of what an authoritarian state can do to mandate the existence of a middle class. They could just move a city, you know? We don't like the city here, we're going to plunk it down over there, build a new one. But we shouldn't be jealous because we have a long-term advantage. Our long-term advantage is that we want everyone to thrive, that we actually care about democracy. We're paying attention to that. And so doing democracy better has to be our goal, has to be the point of all this, because in the long term, that's how we're going to win. Where relationships between the state and citizens are thin, sort of invisible, and it's sort of a status, a quid pro quo, you pay me money, I give you services, they can easily be abused. Here's the segue to the responsive city, which Blair Levin helpfully promoted for me, and I'm hoping all of you will read. When I got disillusioned with the federal world and exited, I didn't want any more corrosive and polarized environments. I turned to cities and I cheered up. I really did. Because mayors have to deliver services. It's basically nonpartisan. They are pragmatic. They get things done. And former Mayor Steve Goldsmith of Indianapolis and I wrote The Responsive City as a kind of people magazine of the heroes in City Hall, who are finding ways to use data and internet access to thicken the mesh of democracy, to make possible more visible touch points, more ways of seeing what the city is up to, showing the work of the city. Also making the delivery of services more effective and empowering those heroes to do a better, more professional, more discretionary job. Because we know they're wonderful people working in City Hall. We wanted to celebrate them. These fiber networks plus data give us the gift of sight in cities, to understand, to accomplish much more with thinner resources. Things don't really matter, I think. Only actions and traces of actions matter. And we wrote the book to lift up the stories of these actions and tell the rest of the world what cities are doing to make democracy better. It's hard to see it when you're in the middle of a tremendous transformation, but it's clear to us that this is the best time to be working in cities in 100 years. Coincidentally, it's the best time to be building fiber. Can you see these two things coming together? I think they definitely are. There's a challenge. Here's a key challenge. Kids expect, 80% of them expect same-day delivery. So cities are under real pressure to do things fast. Everybody expects great customer service over their handheld devices. Most people think products will be delivered before they're even thought about. So a city with few resources, unless it makes the big adjustment to becoming a responsive city, risks becoming an anachronism. Why should we deal with you? You can't deal with us the way we do with Facebook and our online services. There's some good developments that are helping the responsive city move along. You don't need IBM these days. You don't need Cisco. A lot of the data programs are commoditized. And processing is becoming cheaper and cheaper. Data mining can circumvent some legacy interoperability issues. And more personnel are comfortable with data. My mission in life these days is to cross-train lawyers and policy students with technologists, so we make wise decisions for the future. Just a few stories, really only two. In the very small town of Jaén, Spain, the mayor tweets constantly. Every police officer has a Twitter handle on his jacket. When you want to rent or use a conference room in City Hall, you tweet at it. When you need social services, you tweet asking for them, direct messages, run everything. There's a sort of constant hum of Twitterism in this little tiny town. It's making a change in the social fabric there. MIT is studying this. I'll confess, Twitter has sponsored the studies. But it's pretty interesting to see what difference this makes. Again, this is lots of touch points, lots of way of feeling the presence of the city in a life. So just think about that for a moment. Here's another story. A guy named Mike Flowers in New York City had been in Iraq and came back from doing intel work to work in City Hall, and he saw tribes everywhere, right? Tribal loyalties and databases hidden from each other by tribes that didn't want to share. And he began doing intel of his own, using a thumb drive, picking up data that might be useful, and built eventually predictive models for things like, where's the next fire going to happen? You know, where are kids at risk of being burned to death in a house? Mike became that empowered employee with data using predictive analytics to help democracy work better. Only today is that kind of position possible, and there are more and more Mike Flowers showing up in city halls all across America. So technology, the touch point here should not be ministerial. It's not really just a tool. It should be at the table for policymaking to make sure that democracy functions better, so that when we come into these battles with China, we will not only thrive, but prevail. So the same fiber capacity that we're all talking about in this conference that allows for human presence can also be used when humans want to manipulate, understand, visualize, and transport vast amount of data. But we don't have that fiber yet in place. We don't have a sustainable foundation for the responsive city. And that's a problem. So last fall, there was this tremendous Code for America Summit. Hundreds and hundreds, 900 younger people, let's say mostly in their 20s, in San Francisco. And they're all talking about data-driven governance and predictive analytics and better use of technology by government, All of that grounded on the assumption that citizens and government will be using handheld devices to be communicating. But you can't do this without fiber. This entire vision won't work unless you've got a completely reliable infrastructure in place to ship around everything when needed, as needed. We won't have the backhaul to do it. I'm using responsive very intentionally. This is not about some automatic city running itself sort of a spooky way by a machine. Humans make the policies, decide what happens, and make this mesh of democratic engagement visible. Cities show their work, they become trusted. So we're in a phase change, and I'm so pleased to be meeting all of you, talk about how we're going to get fiber here, how we're going to mesh this with the vision of the responsive city that provides our long-term advantage in the world. This is a phase change, a set of minimum jumps that will produce maximum changes in human lives. The empires of the future are the empires of the mind, and that's what President Obama has in his head when he's talking about the importance of community fiber. He's empire building for the future, and it's inspiring. And we should respond, because Americans at their best are never cynical. We believe in the future of our country. That's the vision he's trying to put across to us. So the right question for American cities and for the country is not really what's a gig for. The better question is, where do we want humans to go? Where do we want American humans to go? What do we want them to be? Many people have said that. There's some young Mozart out there on the wrong side of the tracks who is busy playing with toys, but is waiting for us to install fiber so that he or she can create something unimaginable by us. We want that young Mozart to thrive and join the middle class in America. It's an imperative. The president is calling to us in our sense of adventure, and I'm very glad that all of you are on this journey. Thank you so much. Place called Knuckleheads, which seems to be calling, right? So let's just go. Thank you. Appreciate it.